Adele Framer, the founder of SurvivingAntidepressants.org and the Psychotropic Deprescribing Council. Dr. Anders Sørensen is here to answer questions about the topics in his recently published book, Crossing Zero, The Art and Science of Coming Off and Staying Off Psychiatric Drugs. These questions are from members of SurvivingAntidepressants.org and followers of the Psychotropic Deprescribing Council on Facebook. Anders has lots of questions to answer, so I'll hand this over to him after a minute. The Psychotropic Deprescribing Council is a nonprofit, and we would very much appreciate your donations to support programs of this type. If time allows, Anders also will answer questions from webinar attendees in the Zoom chat. Anders will not be able to give advice about individual situations, either from posts here or comments in the webinar. A video recording will appear later on the Surviving Antidepressants YouTube channel, the Psychotropic Deprescribing Council YouTube channel, and Anders' own YouTube channel. And now I want to introduce Anders Sørensen. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. The classic question, is the audio going through? Good. Annoying question, I know, but it's also annoying to start talking and then having to repeat. Believe me, I've tried that a couple of times. Okay, well, I suppose you're always supposed to say thank you for inviting me and that you're honored to be here, but I am truly honored to be here. Like what Surviving Antidepressants and you, Adele, and all the people on it has done for so many people over the years when the medical system failed is truly, truly amazing. And any way I can contribute to that, let me know. So I am truly honored to be here. And the way that I like to phrase it too, that we silly scientists and researchers only came after, sometimes confirming. So a lot of the knowledge we have around how to taper and how not to taper obviously really stems from the survival movement and groups like Surviving Antidepressants. So we should keep, and we researchers should also, I think, keep repeating that story for it not to get lost. It's really, really important. So thanks so much for having me. And first of all, like it's worth noting, as it always is with these Q&As, I find that the far majority of these questions are really about how to fix the aftermath of an incorrect taper, like what to do when we've already shocked the nervous system or kindled it or caused protracted withdrawal or not seem to stabilize after reinstating. Like as long as the guidelines are as they are, recommending rapid tapers resembling cold turkeys, this problem is going to come up. So that's where I wanted to start, really, because I think that's most important. And there's a lot of questions. We'll try to see if we can get to all of them, but a lot of them overlap in terms of asking different questions about what to do if you've already tapered too fast and find yourself either in protracted withdrawal or not stabilizing to reinstating, what to do. And obviously, there are many opinions in the field, like, and believe me, anyone and the ones working in the field will know this. Like a lot of the referrals we get are from people who tapered too fast and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months in still find themselves in withdrawal. And the big question there is what to do, to reinstate, a stay, or further taper. The big question seems to be whether to reinstate or to hold. And those of you who've read my book will say there's not a lot of guidance on that. Deliberately, I try to provide the principles for what I would do, like take readers and take listeners here through my rationale in that situation, hoping it will help, because it is so individual what to do. And for sure, most people, there will be an element of being scared too, because if you've tried to taper too fast and if you've tried having severe withdrawal into your life, you gain a lot of respect and fear for it. So I get why you'd really, really be hyper-focused on doing the right thing. And hence, I find it more problematic to give concrete advice because it varies so much. But there are some principles. So it's not that it'll stay with the vague answer of not to do. So I'm going to try to just briefly in the beginning here take you through my rationale in such situations. And the mechanism here, just to start on common grounds, I think that most people would agree that if you taper too fast, like if you make too big a cut, or just jump off, or make too frequent reductions and go into withdrawal, even severe withdrawal, I think most of us in the field would agree that the solution would just be to up the dose. Like you have some window of reinstatement, where it works. I'm not saying that for some it can't get long and protracted already there, but I think we have, if it's in weeks, days to weeks, however long that window of reinstatement is, for most people, even in severe withdrawal, reinstating will work. And I'll use reinstating and maybe increasing the dose as a very valuable tool in a taper, because even though we have the occupancy graphs, which I'll get back to, we have an idea of when reductions need to get smaller, and we have an idea about the 3, 5, 10% range. There'll always be an element of unpredictability when it comes to psychiatric drug withdrawal. Also, when we have the occupancy data, because it's the mean, it's not a true occupancy data for one drug. I'll get back to that. So it means there's inevitably an element of making a reduction that's too big. And I at least find in my practice that increasing the dose is a really, really valuable tool if you do it fast enough. Now, the question is, how fast is fast enough? So I think the mechanism here causing the protracted withdrawal and causing the kindling and the situations where reinstating doesn't work is because we wait too long in severe withdrawal, which obviously varies. But I think most people would agree, and I hope that increasing the dose or reinstating within that window of reinstatement, which we don't know how long is a very effective solution. Problem is then, if you didn't know this, as most people didn't, because it isn't out in the mainstream yet, so most people only find out when they've already tapered too fast. What do we do then if symptoms haven't resolved in XYZ many months? The question is, can we just reinstate and see what happens? And the problem is really that 3 things can happen. Sometimes if we reinstate after too long and severe withdrawal, it can kind of, I think, create its own problem, meaning that now, even though the symptoms are clearly caused by withdrawal, we've stayed in it so long that the body won't necessarily accept us reinstating the drug. And the problem is that 3 things can happen, like either it works, which it does for a lot of people, even after months. There's no way, that's one of the questions too, there's no reliable way to predict it. That's what makes it so scary. We don't know how to. For some people, it just plain out works, meaning the body gets what it's screaming for, which is basically what withdrawal is, and therefore the signal stops. So that portion of people is easy enough. It just works and it stops. For some people, it just doesn't work. That doesn't mean it isn't withdrawal. It just means maybe we've stayed in it for too long, so the body has created a new situation has emerged where the body doesn't accept it anymore. And then obviously, if it doesn't work, then we could just stop and figure out ways to go. But there is also the third option that I know, or I'm fairly sure many of you will have seen, where reinstating actually makes it worse. So it's not just that it's a free ride and either it works or doesn't work, it can also make it worse. And I think the mechanism underpinning that situation is what we'd call kindling, which there also is a question of. And kindling in the academic literature is mostly associated, and sometimes only, with benzos and alcohol. But, you know, so is withdrawal and protracted withdrawal in many academic areas. It isn't even acknowledged yet. So that's not an argument that it can't be a thing. I think kindling is a very, very theoretically simple mechanism, meaning that we can stretch the nervous system and we can introduce drugs and we can come off and we can change the dose, but there is a limit how much we can stretch that poor nervous system. And what can happen if we make a cold turkey or too many dose changes or drug switches up and down, like if we make too many or too big changes in the nervous system, it can get kindled, which I usually describe as a state of shock in the nervous system. Like, there's a limit as to how much we can perturb it. So there is a place, and it varies by people, individuals, but there is a mechanism in the nervous system that can make it just put up the big guardrails and say, stop. Like, it's really just a nervous system trying to make us not perturb it any further. And when that happens, the problem is now the nervous system is hypersensitive to the drug it previously tolerated in the way it tolerated at the stable level. So now the health situation is that if you reinstate, the nervous system will be in a different situation. I mean, now it reacts differently to the dose it previously tolerated, and now the person is stuck because now you're in horrible withdrawal if you don't take it, and you're kindled if you do take it. So I think that's the mechanism that can explain the situation where reinstating or even increasing makes it worse. It's really just a shocked nervous system, meaning it reacts differently to the drug and possibly other things. That's another main point. And this is where there's a question, is there hope if you're caught in protracted withdrawal or kindling or not stabilizing when reinstating? And there is. And I think one of the things I have luck doing is understanding that the kindling mechanism, this heightened sensitivity, can go beyond the drug itself. And we see this all the time, like people developing sudden sensitivities to caffeine, sugars, sweeteners, alcohol, certain supplements. So the idea that the shock can extend beyond the drug itself, I think, is a really important mechanism to talk a bit about here, because sometimes the solution to those three situations, protracted withdrawal, not stabilizing after reinstating, or kindling, is to search for other things to eliminate. And you have to look for things that wasn't a problem before. And those of you who know me will know that I'm not a huge fan of too strict lists of things you suddenly can't do when you taper, like no alcohol, no exercise, no sugars, no nothing, like no stress. You can definitely get a stressor in itself to live under these very strict rules and do's and don'ts. So we really have to be sure that it's helpful. But when it comes to kindling and protracted withdrawal, I've really seen it make a difference, because if we understand the kindling mechanism, it means that we're not stabilizing because something is still perturbing the nervous system in a way that it doesn't like. It can be the drug, but it can also just be a question of lowering the overall load on what perturbs the nervous system, which is broad. So sometimes removing, for example, sugars or caffeine or alcohol, and especially the sugar, I would say, it's not just to bash sugars, but the more we know about ketosis and metabolic psychiatry and everything, even though sugars is normal, it really is a huge toll. It takes a huge toll on the nervous system. So we can be fairly sure that the body will prioritize dealing with the sugars if you have a very, very carb or sugar heavy diet. So this is just, I'm just trying to help people see some levers to pull when we find ourselves in this unfortunate situation. And exploring a bit what in your diet could, and it could also be sweeteners, and it could be supplements, it could be caffeine and sugars are the big ones. It can really make a difference. I've seen that make a huge difference for people who find themselves, which then suddenly the nervous system finds itself. And some people even go full keto on it, if you know that, like going a full high fat, low carb diet, which there's all sorts of evidence investigating now. And it just turns out that ketosis, like restricting the body of carbs, seems to be the best metabolic state for the body to heal. So for me, it makes theoretical sense. We can't, the problem is that we can't intervene a lot. Like if your nervous system is convinced that there's danger ahead and that we've shocked it too much, it just keeps sending symptoms. We were very limited as to how we could intervene in that system, and speed it up. That's exactly what makes the situation so horrible. But what we can do is provide the best available circumstances for the body to heal. And fasting and taking time off eating, which we can do in keto, and the autophagy, if people know about that, the state where the body repairs and deletes old cells, is just through the roof in ketosis. So really, if you find yourself in a situation, try to look up keto and ketosis and give it a go. There's no, I would say, risk in doing it. And I've really seen it help a lot of people if you find yourself in an adverse reaction to reinstating. And if that's too dramatic, then know that yes, time, and that's one of the big questions, a long hold is really the best thing you can do if you've fucked up your nervous system and if your nervous system is angry with you and screaming at you with symptoms. The only thing we don't want to is perturb it further. So a long hold, which could be a very long hold, we've definitely seen work too, because the most important thing we want is to not perturb it further. So stability and time, and not adding all sorts of supplements that could interfere further, and not making dose reductions and not doing any drastic is the most important thing. So yes, there's definitely hope, and there is things we can do. And if this caught your interest, please, we could have another maybe webinar on exactly this for an hour, because it's such an important topic for people to talk about. And we in the field should actually get together, I find, and talk more about it, because research isn't there. Like, if you can imagine where the paradigm is in academia, it hasn't asked this question yet. Most parts of academia still doesn't believe severe withdrawal exists. So obviously it won't also ask the question of how to fix it. So, but understanding the basics about the nervous system and how it works in ketosis and autophagy and kindling really does the trick. And sometimes I should say, just to keep it, and then I'll go on to the next question. I hope it's okay that I spend some time on this. Sometimes the nervous system can't really, you're not in severe withdrawal, but you're not completely stable. I find this to happen a lot in the lower doses because, and I'm fairly sure this is the same way in UK, US as it is in Denmark. We know that the different brands can use different fillers and stuff, making the different brands different. But because the therapeutic index, as it's called with psychiatric drugs, is so large, then actually, at least in Denmark, there's no rule to say that each capsule has to have the exact same dose. It can vary. So 50 milligrams is not 50 milligrams. It can vary a bit, which obviously, if you're in the higher doses, that makes no difference. Not a problem. But the lower you go on that curve, on the steep end of the hyperbolic curve, the more it matters. And I think that must be part of the reason why sometimes when you reach the very low doses, you never fully stabilize, whether you cold turkey it or kindle it or not. I find, and we could talk about more of this later if it's important to people out there, that a lot of people find it difficult to stabilize fully, even with the correct table, the lower you go. And that would just make sense if the problem is that the doses vary a bit, because the whole mechanism underlying withdrawal and tapering is homeostasis. The body's just constantly trying to figure out what we're doing to it. And if the dose varies just a bit in the lower dose range, that could explain why you don't fully stabilize. And the reason why I'm saying that is that sometimes, ironically, and I'm not going to give any concrete advice on when, sometimes the solution is to keep reducing, even though there is some symptoms, because maybe you can't fully stabilize months or years after if the dose varies just a little bit. So just for those out there who don't find themselves fully stabilized, and this is, subject to all sorts of controversy, but when to reduce. And that's going back to what we talked about before, you gain a lot of fear and respect for doing the wrong thing. So you don't want to taper when the solution was to hold. You also don't want to hold unnecessarily when the solution actually was to start making some tiny, tiny reductions again. Because what you were feeling is in fact just the adverse effects of being on the drug and the effects of taking different doses. So enough about that. I really hope that was helpful about the protracted withdrawal and not healing. So now I'm just going to I've just prioritized some questions. I'm going to take them one at a time, and I hope that will be helpful. It would be a bit of skipping from one thing to the next, but all the questions are good. And I don't just say that to please people. They are, and they're all relevant. And the ones we don't get to here, we'll take in a later video. So, and the first question that I find really interesting is Dr. Sørensen. I always like being called that. In Denmark, you're not a doctor with a PhD. That's something else. So I got to get used to be called that. It's a different terminology. So does anyone do well remain normal by themselves with long-term psych drugs use, or is deprescribing the only answer for all people? I think this is a very important question, because I think for most people, what psychiatric drugs do, regardless of category, antidepressant, antipsychotics, benzo, is in some ways, for most people, it kind of limits the full emotional range, right? That's why they can be helpful in an acute crisis. It can be worth not feeling the highs for not feeling the lows in an acute crisis situation. So what we have to understand is that's just the way these drugs work. They do numb or put a lid on, as we say in Danish, or restrict the emotional range. That's just how the drugs work. So we have to think that for most people, there will be a limit, a roof of how high mood can go, initiative, drive, motivation, creativity, energy, all these things that the drugs can work to reduce. It's really important to understand that these are not antidepressants or antipsychotics in the sense that they just enter the brain and remove the psychosis or remove the depression. It numbs all sorts of things. So yes, if your situation is that you're limited in your emotional range as how well you can be on the drug, yes, then the solution is to come off the drug. So I hope this makes sense. Like these are psychoactive substances. There will be a limit as to how high your mood can go. And if that's why you don't do well on the medication, then I can't see why you'd heal from that, like why you would become better on the drug. And this is something everyone needs to obviously reflect on for themselves. But yes, definitely, coming off the medication can, in many situations, be the only way to really restore that full range of emotions, good or bad, or positive and negative, as we say. There's no bad emotions. We should not call them negative. We should just call them unpleasant. So yes, sometimes and often deprescribing is the answer to whatever the drug's doing to you. That'll keep doing that until you're off it. Okay, next question, really important also, tapering fluvoxamine. And really this question goes for tapering any drug that we don't have occupancy data for. So the question is that the SIRT occupancy in my book slightly differs from the Mosley guidelines, not a lot, just a wider range. And because fluvoxamine, as it seems to be less widely known drug, and that is true, it's such an important question because fluvoxamine and other psychiatric drugs are less known, but the principle is still exactly the same for tapering. So for drugs where we don't have the occupancy data and we can't draw the curves, or where we have less data, meaning the curves are less certain, more uncertain, that doesn't change the fundamental principle though. We just know less about when that bend curves and when we need to slow down. But my point is, first point to make, it doesn't change the fundamental principles. As far as I can see, all psychiatric drugs, all psychoactive substances need to be tapered hyperbolic because the law of mass action, as it's called, is a fundamental universal thing. So first thing is, even though we don't have the occupancy data, we still have the principle. It just means we know less about when exactly that bend starts to come down and we need to slow down. But that uncertainty, I should stress, is also there on the drugs where we do have the occupancy data, because it's not one true occupancy. It's such an important point. You can't just take your drug and your dose and read it off at the occupancy graphs and say, that's exactly where I am. That means I can reduce this much, because it varies. And you can see that if you're geeky enough to go into the primary articles, you can see that there is a standard deviation and there's a variation. So the way we make these graphs is that we have a lot of data, group data, and we draw a line through the mean, the average. So there will always be an uncertainty. It's just a bit more on the drugs when we don't have it, but the principles still exactly the same for all the drugs. So we don't use a lot of fluvoxamine in Denmark, so I haven't had a lot of clients, but I have a lot of international clients on it, and it's definitely possible to come off. Good. So next question is that I've written an article titled "Why Skipping Antidepressant Doses is Risky." And I should say that the main article is with Mark Horowitz too, and James O'Neill, I think it is. So I just wrote a Substack article summarizing it. And we know this silly, and I'm the co-author on it too, obviously, but they're the main ones. So skipping doses is, many doctors go to advice because they don't understand that we can manipulate the doses and make them smaller. So this silly advice of skipping doses is out there, and I hope for it to die soon, because it really, there's no good thing about it. And if you just understand the first thing about tapering and withdrawal, you'd know why. Again, the basic mechanism underpinning withdrawal is that the body is constantly seeking homeostasis. So the very idea of coming off of the psychiatric drugs is to lower the dose gradually and slowly, because every time we change the dose, as we know, we actually make a little imbalance in the nervous system, which, if the reduction is small enough, the brain knows how to fix. Maybe it'll send some mild to moderate symptoms, or it'll send no symptoms, but it knows how to fix it. And severe withdrawal is purely and simply the body's reaction to us making a too big disturbance in it. And when we understand that mechanism, it kind of makes sense why taking 50-25, 50-25, or 25-0, 25-0 doesn't make sense, because how can homeostasis do its thing if it gets one direction one day and another the next day? It's completely impossible for me to see how the nervous system would heal, because we give it different inputs on different days. And that's what really, if we do that on a low enough dose, this can cause the kindling, as that we talked about before, because it in itself is a source to disrupt it. So everything that we just talk about with kindling really applies to this. And the basic solution is simply stop skipping and stabilize on a dose. And the higher the dose, the less the risk is that there's going to be a change, because the change of skipping doses, the difference is bigger at the lower dose range. So I think for most people, it won't have like a lasting effect. I think that's kind of the question here. So you just need to understand that that's why your nervous system hasn't stabilized, because you've been giving it different directions on other days. That's why it can't do its thing. But I rarely see like any permanent, it's not like it's going to permanently damage the nervous system. I think you should just stop doing it and stabilize, and then most people will be fine. Okay, next very important question is about Effexor or any other drug where you reach the very low doses. Like there's a question here that there's no easy way to come off Effexor extended release. True, because once you get below the 3 microbeats. So this is just the limitation we're all facing, as long as drug companies don't want to, because they don't have to make smaller doses. When you reach the final 3 beats and can't get any lower, there really, in my opinion, isn't a whole of options other than to remove the 3 beats. You could make some liquids. You could maybe, if you tolerate it, and we'll get back to that, add the tiny, and I know this is a controversial one, because people think of it as a bridge, adding the fluoxetine. I really more consider it an add-on, and I've really seen it, at least theoretically, help, because the idea is once you're limited, you can't go lower than 1 beat. When you have 3 beats, you can't remove half a beat for obvious reasons. Then what do you do? One thing is, of course, then it just means we need to up our how to manage withdrawal, how to get through it. It sounds rough, but really we have to do everything we can do for people in that situation to help them through the withdrawal that's going to be there. That's like the psychological, social thing to do when you can't make the reduction in small, just have to go with whatever symptoms they cause. And for a lot of people, it'll be rough, but we'll get through it. And I have this all the time. And I think most people working in this field have this, like, knows what to do when we can't limit the reductions any smaller and make them any smaller. The only like pharmacological thing I could see to do is the fluoxetine, to add it. And I know it doesn't overlap completely with the noradrenaline and stuff from Effexor, but it does take the bulk of it from the serotonin. I've definitely seen it help. I've also seen bridging not help and make it much worse, usually when we considered a switch going from one drug to fluoxetine, because the receptor overlap is not complete. So you will get withdrawals from the receptors that are not overlapping with fluoxetine. I'd rather consider adding it. And I know this can sound, and don't do this just because I say it, really do it with whoever is helping you, because it can make it worse too. But when you're at that very low dose, it actually makes theoretical sense to add just 1 or 0.5 milligram of fluoxetine. The idea being that if the fluoxetine can start blocking some of the receptors that would otherwise go unblocked from removing 1 beat, then it can theoretically help. And I use it a lot, but I'm very careful when doing it only at the lower dose because of the risk of serotonin syndrome and stuff. So it can definitely feel like a step backwards adding another drug when you're just about to turn off it. But combining all things, it's really easy to figure out if it works. Add a tiny dose of fluoxetine if you can get your doctor along, and then make a reduction from the original drug and just compare how that was to the previous one. Again, I've seen it be a lifesaver for someone, and I've seen it not work, and I've seen it make it worse. And if it makes it worse when you start it, that's just your sign that it's not going to work. If it doesn't work, stop the fluoxetine. And if it works, then what usually happens is that now we can remove the microbeads. Remember, there's a very small dose of fluoxetine, smaller than you'd think, because you only need to cover that percentage. Otherwise, it means increasing the dose, which disrupts it further. And then sometimes what happens when it works is that now finally we can remove the microbeads with either no or much less withdrawal symptoms than before. And that makes sense because the fluoxetine is there blocking it. So even though you remove the bead, it doesn't change as big it doesn't cause as dramatic a change in receptors as it did before. And then obviously when you're off the Effexor, you're left with fluoxetine, which also needs tapering. The idea being that that is easier, not necessarily easy, but easier to come off than the Effexor because of the half-life. So, and there's controversy around that, and that's why I always stress it helps, doesn't help, or makes it worse. So we should have more conversations about that. But done in the right way, not as a switch, but a bridge, staying on both drugs for some time, it can definitely definitely help. So and I know this is an East and West, but that's, what keeps it going, different kinds of questions. The next one I think is important too. Does alcohol hinder recovery? And I think it can sometimes, because, and again, I'm not for these very, very strict lists. I think if you're one of the ones who will get an acute adverse reaction to alcohol, to drinking while taking or drinking while tapering the medications, you'll know, like you just have to try and see, like you'll definitely know if you have a very adverse reaction to it, and then obviously not do it. But for most people, I think the idea is just that the body is hierarchical in some sense. So I do believe it can interfere. Like if we give the body two tasks, okay, recalibrate your receptors after this drug and metabolize and eliminate alcohol, it will prioritize. So I can't see the situation where it won't interfere in some way. It's not necessarily because the alcohol interferes with the same neurotransmitters that the drug does. That would be a problem, but it doesn't have to do that. As long as it's just putting some stress on the body, I think we have it. And the analogy I always use is, well, if you, the example, say you were to, not in withdrawal, but just normally go to the gym and work out, drink beers, go to sleep. Now your body has two tasks to complete. It has to rebuild the muscles that you've damaged under control, and it has to excrete the alcohol. Which is it going to prioritize? Well, obviously the toxin, the alcohol. So muscle recovery is slowed while you drink alcohol. And I think the same logic applies. Like if the body has to both readjust receptors and do its thing with alcohol, it's going to go slower. So yes, I think it can interfere, but I don't think that it's like a dramatic, obviously if you drink all the time, but once in a while, if it adds to your quality of life, if it helps you get through it, I think people should generally do it unless they have an paradoxical effect, because it can really get sad if you have to be in withdrawal and remove everything that once, and it's a social thing too, brought pleasure. So I hope that answer wasn't too vague. Yes, it can interfere, but if it brings enough life quality to do it once in a while, do it, as with the coffee and stuff. Okay. Here's a question I'd love to have the answer to. What's the likelihood of someone developing akathisia or severe neurological problems after discontinuing SSRIs following long-term use? We don't know. Absolutely no clue, because we'd need to ask a lot of people for that statistic to make sense. All we know is that it for sure can happen, and that's why we'd never, ever recommend a cold turkey. I for sure wouldn't. I do see the people who seem to recover even after years and years on SSRIs, follow their doctor's advice and stop cold turkey or taper rapidly. And then their systems just, all symptoms fade or stop after 3-4 months or something. So I do see people heal fully, even after the most incorrect taper. But I also see people not heal and it becoming very, very protracted. So with that in mind, I would never do it, but the pure statistics of how many it happens for, we don't have, and I don't think we'll ever get it, because that would mean that mainstream academia would have to be interested in the question and investigate enough of people. We need a lot of people for these statistics to make sense. So the sad reality is that we don't know, but for most people, I'm sure, and that we have seen, it does recover. However much you've messed up the nervous system, it does recover. I really want to be a proponent of that element of hope. But the time frame can be long, almost similar to concussions. Like in the field of concussions, it's perfectly accepted that recovering fully can take years. And I think that's the same here. So that combined with what we talked about before, with eliminating things under the kindling effect, time and stabilizing, and treating our bodies well. I know that's a very, very vague advice, but it's the way we have to think about it. We can't intervene in a nervous system that's protracted withdrawal or kindle, but we can provide the best available circumstances for it to heal. And diet just happens to be one thing that we can control. I'm not going to go on another rant on that one. Okay, very important question. If you come off medication, all of them are important. If you come off medication and the problem, it was masking comes back, for me, contamination OCD, can I reinstate my medication after 6 months? I have to be the very, very annoying psychology type here and say, well, if all the drug did was to mask it and treat the symptoms, then in many cases, it will return because that's all the drug did. So I'm not saying that for everyone, because that's a negative story too. So I'm not saying that for everyone, you're just going to expect that however you felt when you started, that's going to return. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying. Mostly because you've changed your situation or your habits or your relationships or you've done to therapy, if you can, all sorts of things have changed since then. But when it comes to the actual thoughts or emotions that the drug numbed, it's really important to understand that that's just what the drug does. The way it works, it's so simple. Psychiatry hates when we say this because they really want their drugs to be something very specific that only doctors can talk about. And they really want it to be something very specific biochemical that it fixes. It doesn't. It just provides symptomatic relief when it works. For a lot of people, it doesn't even do that. But this question is about when it works. When a psychiatric drug works, whatever one means by that, all it does is mask, cover it up. So it's not that the drug, even when it works, it doesn't technically remove anything. It just adds another emotional or cognitive state on top that if the drug's strong enough, that's the one we'll feel. Our other thoughts and pains are still underneath. So it kind of makes sense to me that if a person didn't or maybe couldn't address the OCD or the intrusive thoughts in other ways while medicated, it's a natural part of coming off the drug, I think, that those thoughts can return. And that's why half of my book is not about how to come off, but how to stay off. So you'll find chapters devoted and Substack articles and whole psychotherapy schools devoted to how then do we manage those thoughts. So I would say you could reinstate, like that's just the medical solution to OCD, it's to numb the thoughts if that works. But I'd rather go because that's what I just happen to do. There's other ways, and especially OCD, like if all a person did was mask the thought, and now you're coming off the drug, meaning whatever the drug did to you, now it doesn't. So usually there would be a little bit more activity or more activity in your thoughts. The emotional range will start to increase for good and bad, pleasant, unpleasant. So it's completely normal that the once numbed thoughts now resurface. And then what do we do? That exact moments where intrusive thoughts or depressed thoughts, psychotic thoughts, or what if thoughts or rumination thoughts reappear, what then do we do if we don't want to reinstate the drug and numb it again? And there's we could do, and I'll gladly do a whole session on that sometime because it's such a specific question and different psychotherapy schools have different ideas on that. But usually the way I would do it, what's called metacognitive therapy, and there's a chapter on that in the book, OCD is highly treatable. 6, 8, 10 sessions is usually what would take. And then for most people, if we do it right, it's highly, highly treatable. So there are options beyond reinstating the drug. While I hope that I've emphasized it's a normal part of it. And the problem is, well, if you come off too fast, withdrawal is, as most of you will know, is also having a lot of weird thoughts and neuroemotions. It's not just the physical symptoms. So that's what makes it so messy. But in this situation, I read the question in a way that, okay, came off hyperbolically slowly, and then the thoughts returned. So, of course, the first answer to that question would be, okay, if you tapered too fast, I wouldn't start doing all the fancy therapy attention training things. I would figure out whether it was, in fact, an incorrect taper. So I hope that question makes sense. But it's a huge part for a lot of people because what the drugs do is basically just numb or shorten, restrict the cognitive and emotional range, then it's a normal part of coming off it, making that transition into it again. And well, emotions and thoughts are strong forces. So having been away from them for months or years and then suddenly returning, so even a normal mind, whatever that is, with all its negative and intrusive thoughts, can be a huge step and another reason to taper slowly, actually. And that's where some element of therapy or emotion regulation or being there for each other or just understanding the basics about how thoughts work, how the mind works. The mind produces up to 70,000 thoughts a day, a lot of thoughts. Some of them will be intrusive, negative, weird, illegal, shameful, unproductive, and we gotta have strategies to manage those. Okay, we could talk more about that another time, maybe. Okay, and then a question about the generics problem. And it seems to be going unaddressed and is causing mysterious problems in tapering. I'm sure a lot of you have either tried it themselves or seen a loved one or someone they work with react to changing not the drug, but the manufacturer. So there's this idea that some people can just swap between, okay, you want the cheapest, at least that's what they ask here in Denmark when you go to the drugstore. Do you want the cheapest drug? And then they say yes, meaning that people swap around from different brands, same drug, different brand. And some people can do that, no problem whatsoever. And some people can't, because as we know, manufacturers are allowed a certain margin of difference in both in the active ingredients and in fillers and coatings and all sorts of things, which we know for a fact can change how the drug's absorbed in the body. So yes, changing from one manufacturer to another the drug would still be the same, but it can cause problems. I find a lot of people want to know why, like want to know the mechanism of why they can't change. I personally don't think that's so important. The important thing is that it can happen, that some people do react and have to stay on the same drug. I'm not sure knowing why. I'd like to know why, be cool knowledge to have, but I'm not sure that knowledge will help us a lot because you'd still react. So as much as I'd love the answer to that, I don't think it's helpful in that situation. You just have to conclude that, put thick line underneath it. If you're one of the ones, stay on the same drug because your body will react. And another thing is, as we talked about before, maybe manufacturers use different dosages because, and it's called the therapeutic index. It just means at higher doses, it's not that important what dose you get. It's just a clinical observation when they make the drugs. And if the therapeutic index is high, meaning the patient can use this or that dose, it doesn't really have an effect on the clinical effect. Then what happens is that there'll be there'll be less rules about less restrictions about how precise the dose has to be. Whereas in some cancer medicines, for example, the therapeutic index is extremely narrow. So there's a lot of control with pharmacists and companies making the exact same dose. That's not the case with psychiatric drugs. And that could also explain why some people, if they happen to go on another manufacturer that just varies more, that could explain why it doesn't work. So yes, definitely. And I see a lot of also doctors and psychiatrists and pharmacists not believe in their patients because it's the same drug. And as always, amused me why you don't believe in your patients. It's right there in front of you. It's them experiencing it. So we don't know why, but we know that. Next question related to that, and then I actually just have one more, and then we can go to questions from here. What actually happens in the brain when a patient switches from one SSRI to another, for example, from paroxetine to fluoxetine after long-term use? Is this a true cross taper, or does it risk trigger a neurochemical destabilization similar to withdrawal? Yes. So the idea of switching from one drug to another only kind of works if the receptor profile is exactly the same. And that's why we can often do it with benzos, because they're much simpler drugs. So with benzodiazepines, I would almost, and there could be different opinions, and I'd love to discuss that one day, I would almost always go to diazepam and taper that because it's much more steady. But the receptor profiles are more similar. So we have more freedom to go back and forth. Whereas with the antidepressants, it's not as similar. So I don't have any statistics, but for most people, I would say just a direct switch from one SSRI to another, let alone one SNRI to an SSRI, will not work because the receptor profiles have to be enough similar for it to work. So it makes perfect sense that you can't just, if you're one of the ones who can't just switch from one to another. And that's why it talks about the fluoxetine being an add-on, like you add it to your current dose when you reach the very low dose range, and then you taper from there. So yeah, it will cause withdrawal from the receptors that are not the same. And remember, drugs are even though they're in the same class, drugs still differ on other elements than just the receptor profiles. And what the nervous system is reacting to is changes. And a dose reduction is a change. So any change really in drug or whatever's in the drug can make a reaction. Then you wouldn't technically call it a withdrawal reaction. You just call it a reaction to a change, as is why some people can experience a little a disturbance when they go from tablet to liquid, for example. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means that when you go to liquid, you should be sure to not make a reduction at the same time, just to figure out what's from the switch and what's from the reduction. Okay, final question before we go to questions from the chat. And I get this a lot. It's about my cert paper. So regarding the serotonin transporter occupancy chart in your paper, can you explain why charts for escitalopram are given for and then a different brain regions? And I get this question a lot, and there's no difference. It just means that the way we created that, the methods for that for that paper, is that if some drugs were measured in different brain regions, then we have to provide them all. So it doesn't make any difference at all. That drug just happened to be measured in 4 different brain areas at the doses we wanted to study. That's why there are more. So there's absolutely no interesting fact behind that one. And we have no clue what it means in the different brain regions. It's just we can see that sometimes the occupancy is a bit higher in one brain region compared to the others. I don't really know what we should use that for, but that's just to explain. It has no difference whatsoever. So, and regarding the occupancy, I'm sorry if this is just a repetition, but I really want to help people see that it is the average. It will always vary around that mean. That means that some people will hit their bend, like they will hit the severe withdrawals before others, and that's not wrong. Don't compare yourself to others. Some people can go down to a pretty low dose in terms of milligrams before severe withdrawal hits. For some, it's higher. And it's the same effect that needs to be tapered anyway. So it's not necessarily better to be able to go all the way down to 50 milligrams of sertraline, for example, before withdrawal hits as compared to 100, because it's the same effect that has to be tapered anyway. So it's not like some are lucky and some are not. So yeah, that was a long rant that I hope made sense for people. I tried to pick and choose some different kinds of questions. So if there are some questions from the chat, Adele or Karen, I'd love to take those, and hopefully this has stimulated some other events or we could do specifically around different tapers. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that afterwards. You're muted.
Thank you, Anders. We have probably a dozen questions from chat. I think that I found your talk fascinating so far, and I think other people have really gotten engaged in it.
That's good.
Yes, it's excellent. I have a question myself, and that is, you also did a survey. You were co-author of a survey of existing, I guess you could say discontinuation or deprescribing guidelines for antidepressants. And could you speak very, very summarize what you found? Because this indicates a role for the Psychotropic Deprescribing Council. And I founded the Psychotropic Deprescribing Council to address this very issue. And your paper pretty much profiles what the issue is.
Yeah. So what we did, it's part of my PhD. So we wanted to compare what we know about tapering and withdrawal with what's in the guidelines. And instead of just and we wanted to have some solid evidence to talk, instead of just saying, oh, guidelines are updated, we wanted to show that we'd in fact investigated systematically. So what we just did a systematic review of guidelines, one for their guidance on tapering. So we looked at, do they recommend tapering? How fast, how slow, when? So one is for their guidance on tapering, and another project, same methods, is for their descriptions of withdrawal symptoms, showing that they still call them mild and brief and short-lived and mention 3 to 5 symptoms and lasting about a week, and in rare occasions it can be severe. So it's really just what we did. We just found all the guidelines, international guidelines, systematically, and then just extracted data on what they wrote about this. And the point in doing that is now we can, or you can, if you want to compare and make that argument that we have this much knowledge about it and the guidelines is only this bit. Because we hear all the time that we need more research, right? And we do need more research, but we could really get far by just having the data and experiences that we have in the guidelines. And that's like my main story now. I don't want to buy into the idea that we need more research for things to happen. We just need to use the research that's there. That's why we made them. So if they can be helpful in any way for you, I'm just really, really happy, because those guidelines, once you understand that's the gatekeeper, that's the key. It's a boring, it can be a boring thing to dive into guidelines. It's an official document. It's really important, as long it's a funny thing to be interested in, but once you understand the power of those guidelines, that's what will change everything. Because as long as withdrawals are explained, described as these a bit annoying, self-limiting mild symptoms, that's every time a person's reactions to tapering will exceed that, then it's a relapse. So long story. Does that make sense as an answer? That's just what we did.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
I agree completely. I think that right now that patients and clinicians have enough knowledge to rewrite guidelines. And that is that is our mission. That's what we're going to be doing. And a little later on, I'm going to ask for some donations to help us along with our mission. But right now, I am going to start talking. I'm going to start reading some of the questions from the chat. I think we're going to be going over a few minutes. Is that okay with you if we spend a little bit more time on this?
Yeah, since 8 minutes passed, then I'll just have to catch a train, but it'll be okay.
All right. Mark from Spain recently changed from sertraline tablet to liquid, and after 2 weeks, he's feeling lethargic, sleepy, and wanting to rest at bed. So the change made him feel lethargic and sleepy. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, I think the only explanation we can have for that, or that I could have, is that it is, of course, different for the body if it has to break down a tablet or something liquid. I could only find that it'd be easier and faster for the body. So while it's not a change in dose or drug, it is a change in how, it's my rationale, how the body metabolizes and processes that drug, because the form has changed. So I see this a lot, that there is a change. And as I mentioned before, it should very well be temporary. I don't see it being permanent. So the idea must be, if there is a reaction to making the switch in form from tablet to liquid, that would be my go-to, and see, park it as, okay, it's just a reaction to the body now having to not use the tablet, but the water. And then it would, you consider it a reduction. It's not a reduction, but use the same mindset. Okay, it's likely just my body adjusting to the liquid as opposed to the tablet. Is what I would say. I can't really see why it would stay. I don't know if you've seen something different.
Yes, thanks. Lindsay wants to know, if you go into protracted withdrawal, reinstate, and eventually become stabilized again, how to approach a safe taper?
Yeah, so sometimes the fact that the nervous system did get that shock from the, by definition, too fast taper means that now it will react. It would have an even heightened sensitivity, meaning now the taper has to go slower than before. And sometimes, depending on how long you stayed in protracted withdrawal, I would say, then maybe you're just back. Well, then you just keep tapering as you normally would, but with smaller reductions. So the severe withdrawal, we have to understand as it's feedback from the body. It's our body's telling us that was way too much. And if we just obey and increase the dose, and the body stops setting symptoms, all we have to do is really understand, okay, that reduction, however big or small that was too much. So, and of course, if you're going to make the same reduction again, it's just going to repeat and maybe even be worse. So you have to understand withdrawal as communication from the body. It's just trying to tell us to make a smaller reduction. So I could see it go either way. Either the solution is simply just to make the reduction smaller or much smaller because now the situation has changed because of the shock. So yeah, use it as feedback and clear signal that reductions need to be smaller. And probably that was because you went below that bend plateau thing on the curve, and that's why it got so severe. Yeah.
Okay. This is a good question from Bonnie. I'd like to understand my experience of when I first started SSRI, feeling like the drug was killing me for about 5 days and then feeling better. Is this the same nervous system destabilization as in withdrawal?
I think so too. It's just the other way around. So the mechanism is to understand that the nervous system reacts to change, and the reduction is a change. And not taking a drug and then starting one is a change too. So I don't know what you would call these in English, but at least here it's completely accepted that once you start an SSRI or other psychiatric drug, it's normal, expected even, that you'll have some symptoms in the startup phase. And then at some point your body will get used to that and will stop sending symptoms. So it's the same overall mechanism. It's not a withdrawal. It's just the other way around. The body reacting to suddenly having some chemicals that it didn't used to. And for most people, it should very likely, the symptoms should very likely stop. And if not, that's a pretty clear sign that the body doesn't like it. Yeah.
Right. Alex wants to know, so kindling is only when you have an adverse reaction upon reinstating?
Depends on how you define it. You remember, we use it outside of where it's at least established in the mainstream academia. But yes, the problem with kindling, what makes it a problem is that, as I understand that concept, that we've shocked the nervous system, and the way it does, the way it treats that is it makes itself much more sensitive to the drug. So the whole problem about kindling is that you're in a different situation, meaning that if you reinstate, even though you reinstate to a drug that you've tolerated for years or decades, the situation has now changed because of that shock. So if I understand the question correctly, yes, that's what makes it a problem. And it can also come, this is just purely, there's no science behind this, but it can also be if you've changed drug, drug A, drug B, drug C, drug A, drug D, made a lot of changes, like really just messed up the nervous system, that can trigger it too. The nervous system just really saying, stop. And the only way it can communicate is to cause unpleasant symptoms. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I introduced this concept into our knowledge, and the research is really from alcoholism.
Yeah.
And the basic principle is that kindling is a severe adverse reaction when you introduce a neuroactive substance. So that could be a reinstatement, that could be another drug, that could be having a drink of alcohol while you're tapering. And the kindling is a more severe reaction than an ordinary, it's more severe and long lasting than an ordinary bad reaction. Okay. We will, okay, I'm moving on here. Bonnie would love to have an hour just about dealing with the damaged nervous system. I'd love to have that too. Perhaps we
That's
could
good.
make it.
We could bring about some people from the field who would have, so that we'd have different ideas on it.
Sure.
Would be helpful.
This is a bit of a controversy from Layla. Would you recommend 10% taper or cert occupancy based taper, such as the Modley Deprescribing guidelines?
I would recommend, that's a big one. I would recommend, this is an annoying answer to someone, but I truly believe it's the only one. I will recommend and insist on explaining the principles behind tapering and then applying that. The 10%, I never like these rules of thumb. I know a lot of people don't, because people take them too strict. The 5 to 10% thing is really, as a way I found it, it's just a way to communicate to people completely new to the field where the area is-ish for most people. So obviously, if you make a 10% reduction and you get withdrawal symptoms that interfere with your life, then 10% is too much. Then you have to go to 753, whatever. So it's not, there's no evidence behind it. It's just something that came up when we want to communicate where the areas for most people. So, and that's why I mean, we really have to understand that understanding the principles, understanding what withdrawal is, that it's just a disturbance to the nervous system, meaning it's just our body's trying to make us make a smaller reduction. And once you know that, it kind of frees you up from, okay, which protocol do I have to follow, this protocol or that protocol? It's just different examples of how to do it. So I really think, yeah, spreading knowledge about the basic principle, which once you really crack it, it's theoretically pretty simple actually. And I would always insist on that instead of following someone's, even my own work. And that's why I stress on multiple occasions in the book, these are examples. And even though I stress hundreds of times, these are examples, don't follow them. I still get mails from people saying, I've followed your scheme. I'm saying it's not a scheme. It was an example of how one person succeeding coming off. And for other people, it may be slower. The 5 to 10%, as well as I understand it, that's just to have some idea, okay, where to start. You have to make some reduction. And usually that would be in the 5 to 10% range. And then you titrate the following reductions based on how you react to that one. I don't know if you agree or how you'd put it.
Yes, I completely agree. I think that the basic principle of tapering is that it should be adjusted for the individual. And that I think that from what I'm hearing from clinicians, they adjust, and sometimes they start with Maudsley and then go to a different mode of tapering. And I think that Dr. Horowitz would also agree. He was the author of the
Of course.
guidelines.
Yes.
That this is the principle that we should all take away is that the tapering should be adjusted for the individual. No tapering method is a lucky charm.
No.
So, so it's not it's not a ritual to follow. It is a suggestion of where to start. Okay, I think that, I believe you have to leave. It's 11, it's 8 after.
If you have one more, I'd love to have one.
Okay,
If you
one
have
more.
one.
Naomi wants to know, at very low doses, does it make sense to divide the dose taking it twice a day rather than just once?
Oh, I'd love to hear everyone's opinion on that too. I rarely do it, I'll say. So maybe other people in the field has more experience with it than me. I just can't wrap my head around, like, if you split the dose, how do we know that the body doesn't react to that as halving the dose? Like, because the peak will obviously be lower. So I'll rarely do it, in my honest opinion, but I'd love to hear people's experiences with it.
Well, as a people, I will say that from what I've seen, this doesn't happen very often, but sometimes when people get down to very low doses, they experience interdose withdrawal. And that
exactly.
It's because of variations in the way people metabolize the drug.
But does it help then? Do you find it?
Yes, it does. But it's ordinarily for drugs that have a very short half-life. Especially, say, a benzo. But yes, that can help. And lastly, is it sometimes better to stay on a microdose of an SSRI than to come off completely after many years of use?
Oh, yeah. I haven't tried this myself. I just, geek into it. So it's a hard time answering that because I haven't tried that. But trust me, I believe why that would be appealing, because the last final milligrams can be so horrible to come off that I get why you'd start asking that question. Is it even worth it? But so I would never, I'm not there to say. It is a very, very personal choice to take. I think we should just inform people about that there is, in fact, a way off. Even when you're at that, we just really have to extend the time frame and understand the mechanisms. And if some people choose to stay on it, or at least not come off it yet, because of the way withdrawals will interrupt their life, I completely get it. But I would likely not be the one to choose that for another person.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we have discovered that there is much more to talk about.
Yes, as always. Yes.
And we
Yeah.
will try to arrange that.
Yeah.
And I want to ask people again, we've put the link for donations in the chat. We would really appreciate your donations so that we can continue these series.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you, Anders, so much for talking so eloquently without hardly taking a breath about these really complicated topics. Thanks so
Yeah.
much. Thank you,
Of
everyone, for
course.
attending.
Always.